you should know from 100 years ago, and 100 years we've waited now to tell. Now the Yankees come along, and they'll listen to this song, and they'll quake in fear to hear this rebel yell.
And they'll quake in fear to hear this rebel yell. Yeah! Oh, the South's gonna rise again. Yeah! Oh, the South's gonna rise again.
And welcome to The Deep End. I am your host, Halen Pittman. Now for starters, here on The Deep End, we like to give voice and review to art and media maybe too obscure, obscene, or just too weird to show up on regular folks' radar. Not that we don't appreciate The Walking Dead or high fantasy / were-creature family drama romance, but there's enough love out there for that already. We're here for the stories of maniacs, mutants, killers, and creepers that I feel deserve a little limelight or as much as a fellow in an underlit garage can muster. Because, of course, we are in a garage, not in the dark, deep basements that some people in this wonderful nation might inhabit, because we're in the South, and we don't do basements very much here. And I like to give love, if I can, to my Southern roots. And that's, in fact, what this is about today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Deep End. Beautiful Williamston, South Carolina. And my guest today is Trey Ellison. How are you, sir?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
And to talk about the basic form of this, to give this formless mass some type of structure, you can think of the first part of The Deep End as something like a show and tell product, where I invite people in my life to bring forth things that they consider underrated or things that catch their heart in the right way that they don't feel gets enough play, frankly. And I was glad enough and happy enough to bring in my buddy Trey, and he's here to talk about Jason Latour and Jason Aaron, the writer.
The Jasons.
Yes, the Jasons. Jason Latour as artist, Jason Aaron as the writer, Southern Bastards. And also may talk about the second part of The Deep End, where we also watch a movie which I think is topically related to this. And we'll be watching tonight with the H.G. Lewis classic, if you feel it's a classic, 1964's 2000 Maniacs.
Southern Bastards is a comic put out by Image. It's made by the Jasons, as you mentioned, Latour and Aaron. They both work on the comic, well, separately. 2 different volumes of the comic Wolverine and the X-Men, which is where I best know them. Although I think once this comic gains some popularity, people will think of them as the Southern Bastards guys. And this comic really grabs me because it is, it's about this place I live, this complicated, weird place that I live. The very first page of the comic is a splash, and it shows, it's a highway scene. You're looking down a highway, and you see 3 things primarily. 3 church signs, one of which warns you're going to hell, some discarded beer cans, and a dog crapping, which is just, no matter where you go in the South, that's what you see. That's what's on the side of the road. It's who we are, Halen. We can't run from it. But that's the charm of the comic, is how deeply Southern it is. It's not like Squidbillies, which is sort of an absurd, over-the-top mockery of the South, maybe homage to the South. It's a lot more grounded. If you're not familiar with the South and you're reading Southern Bastards, you probably think it can't be this way, but it is. And it's that flavor that I love.
Tell me a little bit more about, as far as the basic plot of the book.
The plot, as this fellow known as Earl Tubb comes back to his home county of Crawl, Alabama. He's been living just outside Birmingham, which the folks in the book consider to be the big city. You know, you'd think he'd been in New York, but no, he's been in the presumably suburbs of Birmingham. He comes back to close down this house that his uncle, I believe, had been living in. His uncle's dying and all this. And he comes back to find a town worse than ever. And it's dealing with the legacy of his father, who's had this huge impact on the town as a sheriff. There's scenes of artistic violence. It's not gratuitous. It's appropriate.
Are we speaking about like Tarantino style, like putting like a kind of artistic bend on the violence?
Latour puts the way he uses panels. He's mixing these 2 different scenes together, and you see you understand that there's something greatly violent happening. You're not seeing Walking Dead like violence where heads are exploding and arms are coming off and sort of a turnoff for me in a lot of comics. So I was glad to see it depicted. It's honest. It's honest violence, but it's not over the top. It's not zany violence. Okay. But we see this flashback to his father in this greatly violent scene, and you get the feeling that there's some important legacy there. There's some symbolism that should be obvious to the astute reader. So he sets up, he comes back to town, and he finds that there's some strange criminal umbrella that involves the head coach of the local football team, the high school football team.
And this is Alabama, right?
Yes, of course it's the high school football
Okay.
team. What isn't the high school football team in the South?
That you got to have something to have pride in, man.
You got to have pride. You got to have ritual.
SEC football, SEC football, SEC football. There's a wonderful book called Red Hills and Cotton. It was written by a guy who was really good friends with Edgar Murrow, the newscaster.
Right.
The man, he was from Seneca, and he grew up all his life here. He grew up in the 20s and 30s. He died in, I believe, at the end of World War II, or maybe at the early beginning of the Korean War. I can't remember exactly. He died in a plane crash. But he writes a really good narrative as far as, like, what was an upstate South Carolinian's kind of position in life, in that 2030, because he talks about, this is the first time his generation is trying to get up and do more. He's not just, we lost the great, wonderful, everything that was is gone. There's his generation, he's thinking, that's stupid. We're all still here alive. Well, let's make something. Let's do something and stop living a dream.
And unfortunately, that's not happening in Crawl County, Alabama. The army that these southern towns still got is their football army.
Right.
There's a little bit more going on in issue 1, but we'll leave some of that fun.
Okay.
Because the substance, the flavor, we've kind of touched, and you'll see. But some of the fun
and issue 1's actually the only one I've read so far. And tell me if it's a little bit off. Tubb himself was a high school football star in this town.
Yes, he was.
So he's as he comes in, he's kind of like everyone's slapping his back, and they're like, Earl's back into town. And then people kind of realize through whatever this as you called an umbrella criminal enterprise. It's like, Earl, welcome back. Time to get the hell out of town.
Yeah, there's a character, his name's Dusty, who actually, in the same conversation, he says, well, Earl's good to see you. Get on gone now.
Yeah.
Which is a uniquely Southern sort of...
Well, because I get this idea of a criminal enterprise from Jason Aaron, because the main thing that I've read from him is Scout. I've only read the first 2 trades, but it's a Native American man who, in his youth, leaves the reservation because there's nothing there for him, and comes back years later in what they assume is like a dejected and angry at the world thing. So the local crime boss, who effectively runs the reservation, can kind of like recruit him. Through the story, you find out he's actually an agent from the federal government, because since it's a reservation, they can't do anything to this guy who, his lackeys will run out and, commit crimes and do whatever, then run back to the reservation where they have no thing. Well, this guy, as a member of the nation, as a federal agent, goes in to try to take this guy down, which leads to a lot of bloodshed. As far as I've read, it's a very violent comic.
That sounds thematically, it's unified with this, because you've got the insider-outsider who has escaped to some degree, that's a real life thing that happens here in the South as well. But yeah, that sounds like Jason Aaron's maybe working out some issues. We see something in the South that I hate. We see a lot of things in the South that I hate, but I want to talk about this one in particular. You see young, progressive, intelligent people, and they can't wait to get out of here, and they leave. And some of them come back when they're older, but those vigorous, youthful, passionate years where they could be changing the South, making something new, not even changing the South, bringing out what it could be, is lost. Sure. We lose so much of that. Jason Aaron, in his back of issue 1, did you happen to read about the creators page?
I don't remember if I did, man. It's been like 2 months or so since I read that.
Jason Aaron. There's a page in the back of issue 1 where Latour and Aaron, in prose rather than comic, and he says, I love the South. The South scares the living shit out of me. Jason Latour talks about is these people, the assholes you think Southerners are, and the assholes we're afraid we might be.
Good soundbite, that one.
Jefferson was describing all Southerners, and I'd like to thank David Blight for bringing this to my attention in one of his lectures that I heard. But Jefferson says the Southerners are indolent, unsteady, independent, zealous of their own liberties, but trampling on those of others. And I did my best David Blight impression, which I think will be lost on almost everyone. He was describing all Southerners. I think it's a pretty good description for the Southern Bastard. Almost every character in Southern Bastards. I mean, it's so appropriately named, right? Do you think the South is a troubled place, Halen?
The humanity is a troubled place. I think we all kind of have our hang-ups. I think the South, there is a tendency to deify the status quo, or to think what was lost was better even if it may not really be there, because arguably sometimes what was lost was better, but not for everybody, and that's one of the great sins of the South is things might have been better for some people at certain periods of time, but they were not better for everybody. So that doesn't necessarily and I think that it's a tendency to want to change. This is the status quo. What is deviation from the status quo just ain't right.
I agree to a certain extent, but I'm tempted to believe, quite tempted to believe, that we are not just attached to the status quo because of power dynamics and all that, but because changing would require us to acknowledge the original sin of the South. We in the South, the Southern Bastards, we anchor ourselves. And we maybe we would change. As a matter of fact, I think we would. I'm sure we would. But we anchor ourselves to this past, and we don't let things that come in change us. How far from here do you think you have to go to find a Confederate memorial statue? Probably not far.
There's the marker that is right in front of our park. That's about 5 miles away from where we are in Williamson, South Carolina. That has one of the last skirmishes of the Civil War, because there was a troop from the Citadel heading back after the defeat of the South, after the surrender. They were heading back, and they met some other division, and there was like a little skirmish over here. Interestingly, speaking about the graveyard where my grandparents or great grandparents are buried, the old Williamston graveyard, there are Confederate veterans there, buried in the same graveyard, who still have their medals on their graves that no one has touched. They've let the ribbons rot away, but the medals where they fell are still left there, exactly on the grave where it rotted away. No one ever messes with them. No one ever touches them.
Who these Southern Bastards really are the people who think that they are besieged by the present. That the South is some last bastion of a glorious way that things never really were.
And this is what, conceptually, to the comic book, you think something about what Aaron's trying to say, or is just your own twist on the idea?
Maybe he is trying to say it. Time will tell. But I'm saying it. I'm saying it is that the Southern Bastards, the real life Southern Bastards, the ones we encounter every day, are those people who feel besieged by the present, that believe that the sacrifices and flaws of the past are worth it to maintain some impossible idea of a glorious golden age, or probably more accurately, white age. And what they need to know is that they can build their walls, and they can man them with an army, trying to keep all this progress and change out. But they will fail, because the people who are going to change and take away their delusions, take away the injustice, the people who are going to fight for progress, were born inside those walls. And what I really hope is that more of us will stay in those walls until we can tear them down from the inside. Because I see so many people my age going, I can't wait to get out of here. And in some cases, people who have already gotten out of here. And my plea for especially young Southern people who look around and go, do I belong? My plea is that you consider the fact that you absolutely belong. If everybody who has a better vision for the future leaves, it only leaves the terrible meld of the past and the present that these Southern bastards are so attached to. So please, Halen, will you stay here with me?
I was lucky enough to find another person who can, in general, believes what I believe. And, we're as Garth Ennis most eloquently put, son, you got to be one of the good ones because there's way too many of the bad. The reason that I chose to have children, it wasn't some type of, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get married and have kids and do what you do. I wanted to take the lessons that I've learned and to the best of my ability, pass that on, and have my child be a good thing. To do that old cliche of, live a life so that when you enter it, the world rejoices and you cry, and when you leave it, the world cries and you rejoice.
Jesus, what a hopeful note.
That's what I try. That's what I hope for life, man.
How could this possibly end better?
All right.
Good Lord.
Let's watch 2000 Maniacs.
Yeah, let's.
So what'd you think about it, Trey?
I'm surprised he didn't use the word classic in there, because it was.
People do consider it if one considers Herschel Gordon Lewis a master artist, there are people who consider 2000 Maniacs his masterpiece. If they don't consider like The Wizard of Gore or The Gore Girls. Some people might remember his films from Juno. Those are some of the films that those are also Herschel Gordon Lewis. They talk about the horror films in there that they remember from there. But if you haven't seen it, it's loosely based on the idea of Brigadoon, the musical from I believe 1947, about a Scottish Highland town that only appears once every 100 years, and like a guy falls in love with a lady there or something, and they sing songs. It's a musical. Of course, in this, it takes place where a town that was massacred at the end of the Civil War in the South comes back every 100 years to find people from the North and murder them in horrific ways. Such as making someone ride in a barrel after you drive nails through it.
Hold on now.
Right.
Let him discover the gore.
Okay.
Let him discover the wonderful gore.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, I do not dig gore. Horror, I dig like that northeastern, what Lovecraft called Frostborn horror. But not
the supernatural horror of the weird.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not a big guy into stuff like this, but this film did what it did really, really well. And it's a story about human suffering that happens to feature some really intense, acute human suffering using.
Which I pointed out to Trey, and I was happy. Even the ghosts, which you don't find out they're ghosts, but
no worries.
Yeah, we're doing some spoilers. Spoiler alert! Whatever. It's a movie that came out in '64. That they're even causing pain and mayhem and death to these people don't give them peace and release. There's a few characters which I like to refer to almost as like the devils of these creatures' natures, who like to stoke the fires of hatred and pain. And these people, of course, originally they're all lured to the town. They're all told they're going to be celebrants. That you're the guests of honor at our 100-year centennial. You're the guest of honor. We'd love to have you. And they treat them really nice.
This is the victims, he means, not the.
The
townspeople have been there for
the townspeople,
a hot minute.
Townspeople never left. Yeah, because the story goes, like I said, that the Union troops massacred the town, and now 100 years later, their ghosts come back to find anyone they can from. Which I believe the land of Lincoln is the license plate of one of them, which I believe is Illinois. You'd think they'd pick something like, let's get Pennsylvania and New York, or let's get some of those folks from Connecticut or Vermont. But no, they get Illinois folk. Arguably, our main character, a lady coming down to a teachers convention in Atlanta that somehow ends up in Florida. I don't think there's any direct route from Illinois to Atlanta where you end up having Spanish moss on the trees.
Yeah, I know, and marshland.
I don't think going through Tennessee is a whole lot of marshland.
No.
Maybe, I don't know.
The famous Tennessee marshes.
Yes.
If you watch it and you're looking for something to have some meaning, it can affect you. But if you're looking at this film, it's got some substance to it.
It's definitely got real subtext there about, the futility of revenge, and about how even as these ghosts put out the pain and the murder that they experience themselves, it brings no release.
Halen I think you were getting to it. I don't think you actually got to it, but watch their faces once they're done with the torture, I guess we could say.
Right.
Watch the townspeople's faces. You pointed out to me, I didn't really notice, one of the demon yokel figures, and these just look like bumpkins, basically.
Yeah,
don't picture demons, but that's what they are. But forces everybody to sing Dixie and forces them to pretend to be all excited about it after one of them when they're all looking all despondent.
So that's why I kind of like to think of these creatures that goad the people of the town of Pleasant Valley, as it's known, on in their dark, bloody celebrations. They're kind of melancholy about it, but these creatures kind of keep goading them on, like, yeah, it's time for the celebration.
Yeah. It's almost Shakespearean. I'm going to go ahead and call it a Shakespearean film.
Definitely fair. And I would say, could we call these devil creatures, as I refer to them, as Southern bastards?
Yeah.
Because they don't want anything to change.
I wanted to say from the get-go that the townspeople were Southern bastards, but they were Southern victims.
Yeah, they're almost victims.
It's hard to pity Confederates, and I often don't, almost never. But but I will say yes, the demons, the yokels, are Southern bastards.
Yeah,
they want to exploit and harm other people for the sake of this memory of something that, frankly, I'm not even sure. I noticed there's a monument, very small monument, that informs you of the town's massacre. And it's phrased unlike any Southern monument would be phrased. It talks about the massacre of the people and the slaughter and all this, but it doesn't talk about the brave defiance it doesn't glorify these victims in the way that Southern monuments glorify Confederate soldiers and victims of the war. The glorification through monuments is one of the most important things in our memory of the Civil War now. I mean, if you want to talk about why we remember the Civil War the way they do, you go back to Daughters of the Confederacy and their memorial movement.
I remember being 12 years old and taking that trip down to Charleston and seeing Fort Sumter. It's like a Hodge almost, to the memory. Here it's a good Southern boy. It's time to go learn your history.
Oh, yeah. Learn incorrect history, man.
It's run by the National Park Services now, so whatever they tell you is that the approved version of history.
Actually, let's go. This was a great film. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it, man. I changed it up at the last minute because I thought it would be more appropriate.
I mean, I'd never heard of this movie ever.
Well, I'll tell you, man. I mean, this is a large part of what I hope to do with this podcast. You chose well. You took a comic book that laid something of a point about Southern American character, and I'm glad you got to say your piece on it.
I am very thankful for you for sharing this with me. I think there's a young man named Billy, a very young man. I'd say he's 8. I think he's the only child we see at any point.
Pretty much, yeah.
And what do you make of the fact that at one point these Yankee folk have a chance to save this child? We won't worry about the fact that he's like a ghost and who knows what you could actually do.
Or that the first time we meet him in the opening credits, he's hanging a cat with a noose.
But they have a chance to save him from his barbaric, and they're just like, and for really no reason. I mean, they just decide all of a sudden, I'm not into this.
And Billy is their reason for escape. The two survivors trick Billy into showing them where their car is to run away by telling him there's candy in the car and they're going to give it to him.
I wonder, was it a comment on the election of 76? 76?
Well, this is 64.
No. I'm talking about the 1876. I'm sorry. Where the Northern Republicans abandoned the South to its Democrats, to its redeemers. Redeemers is the term people use for the Democrats who were elected right as Reconstruction ended. I don't personally view them as redeemers. That's an important point.
Yeah, it is a historical term.
Is it a strange and out-of-place historical symbol right at the end of the movie? Probably not, but it could be.
Yeah.
Where would you get this movie, Halen?
Something Weird Video, if you have a chance to check it out. Two of the best producers of these forgotten and obscured underground films, definitely Something Weird Video and Blue Underground. Both of those companies keep a lot of things alive, a lot of what would be forgotten. But if you look at any, H.G. Lewis is definitely a name among gorehounds and the history of American horror film. So it's not hard to find 2000 Maniacs. It was actually remade a few years back. I believe it was called 2001 Maniacs.
It was.
With Robert Englund being the mayor, most famous for being Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. He plays the mayor. And not as well received because a lot of people think it for its time, having all the yokels and it's less insensitive than to remake something now. Where you're like, here's all these caricatures of Southern people, murdering the Yankees.
Yeah, I was impressed with the way it was handled. This movie makes something that should be so cut and dry, backwoods, ignorant Southerners, incredibly complex and compelling. Yeah. And it shows that there are two sides to it.
And a lot of people believe that this is the beginning of a chain that extends 10 years, where you make a direct line from 1964 with 2000 Maniacs to 1974 with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of outsiders being lost in the South and falling to the darkness and Southern Gothic nature of our history and the pain and murder that exists in some parts of our story.
It's almost sort of like this comic I know about called Southern Bastards.
It's all called Southern Bastards.
Where a sort of outsider gets caught up in some violence of a town turned in on itself with that.
Yeah. Yes, but so you do recommend Jason Latour's and Jason Aaron's Southern Bastards?
Oh, heartily.
And issue 3 will be coming out June 24th?
June 24th, that's correct. You might have to... I'm pretty sure it's available on Comixology, which is a digital comic site. You might have to turn to something like Amazon or get a back-ordered second edition or something.
Also, don't be afraid to check out your local brick and mortar.
Don't be afraid to...
Simply for the fact that I enjoy supporting local economy if possible.
Definitely. But also, check out Jason Latour will be at Heroes Con June 20th through 22nd, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's very affordable. It's Southern. It's comics. Clearly, I like it. Go check it out.
Well, Trey, I appreciate it here, man, and it's been good talking to you on this inaugural version of The Deep End. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I am Halen Pittman. Have a good night.